The ventilation fans in the vault shut down at 9 o'clock, and in the silence that dropped after them, Bess Aldana heard a second set of footsteps, in a room where she was the only person in the country holding a key. She was 40 aisles deep on a rolling ladder with her hip braced against the rail, a cotton glove on her right hand, and a numbered tub against her chest. The shelves went up past the lamps and kept going, loaded to the roof beams with everything the mail had given up on. Suitcases with no tags, a stuffed bear and a bag marked as recovered loose. 9,000 parcels a month came into that building west of the airport, out where the salt flats start, and every one of them had already failed. Failed addresses, failed handwriting, failed people. When a thing has nowhere left to go in this country, it comes to a room like that one, and to a woman like her. The footsteps came down the main aisle at a walking pace, not hurrying, not hiding. Bess set the tub on the shelf and did not come down. 270, a man's voice said from the floor. She looked over the rail. He was standing at the foot of her ladder, in a dark overcoat. No hat, no snow on his shoulders, even though there had been snow in the parking lot an hour ago, which meant he had been inside the building a long time. In his bare hand, he was holding a clipboard. Her clipboard. Her handwriting, her tally sheet, her count from 3 days ago, and he was reading it. The way a man reads a verdict he already knows. "That is federal property," Bess said. Her voice came out level, and she was proud of that later when she had time to be proud of anything. "And you cannot be in here. You wrote 270. He did not look up. "In pencil, and then you went over it in pen, which means you counted twice." "I counted 3 times. "Why?" "Because they were all the same hand," she said, "and nobody writes the same person 270 times and gets nothing back." Then he did look up, and Bess understood 2 things at once. The first was that she had never seen eyes that gray on a living face. The second was that he had not come there to threaten her, because a man who comes to threaten you shows you something, and this man had shown her nothing at all, and that was worse. "Come down," he said. "No." "Then I will stand here." He put the clipboard flat against his thigh. "How many people have touched that box since it came out of the cage?" "Nobody. I opened the seal myself. It was intact." "How many people have been alone in this room with it?" "Me." Something moved through his face and was gone before it finished. "Then you should think very carefully about the next thing you say to me," he said, "because 270 is the wrong number, and there is exactly one person standing in this building who could have made it wrong." Bess came down the ladder. She came down because she had worked a public counter for 8 years before the recovery center, and 8 years teaches you that you cannot argue with someone from above them. She stood in front of him with the ladder at her back, and he was taller than she had thought, and dry the way rope is dry, and up close she could see the shape of an old prison haircut, still in the way his hair grew. "The right number is 271, he said. "There were 270 in the box. I know. That is what you have just told the entire federal system in writing with your name on it." He said it without any heat whatsoever. "I am Bram Sittler. I wrote 271 letters to one address in this state. 270 of them are on your shelf. The one that is not on your shelf is the first one I ever wrote, and everything I have left is inside it." The fans came back on above them. The whole vault breathed. "Then let me help you find it," Bess said. "That is my job. That is literally my job." "It was your job," Bram Sittler said. 3 days ago you filed a recovery report. 270 items, single correspondent, undeliverable, held 11 years. That report has a control number and a date and a name, and the name is yours, and it went into a database that 11,000 people can search. He handed her the clipboard, and their fingers did not touch, and she noticed that they did not, and she was angry with herself for noticing. There are 2 people alive who have spent 11 years praying that hand would never surface again. As of Tuesday afternoon, they both know it has, and they both know who found it. "Then I will call the inspectors." "Call them." He turned and started down the aisle. "Call them tonight. It will take them 9 days. You will not have 9 days. Bess had been told frightening things across a counter before. What frightened her about this one was that he never raised his voice, and that he walked away from her, and that he did not look back to see what his words had done, because he already knew. She followed him 14 steps and stopped because at the end of the main aisle, the freight door was standing up a foot off the concrete, and the plastic seal that should have been on the latch was lying cut on the floor, and the cold came in under it, smelling of brine off the lake. "That was not me," Bram said. "Then who?" He looked at the gap under the door for a long moment. "Lock everything," he said. "Go home a different way." And then he went out under the door, folding himself down like a man who had learned to fit through small openings. And a car started somewhere out in the dark, and Bess stood alone in her own building, with 270 dead letters at her back, and no idea in the world what she had just walked into. She did not sleep. At 2 in the morning, she was at her kitchen table in Rose Park, with a mug going cold. And by 4, she had done the only thing she knew how to do, which was paperwork. The intake manifest came up on the terminal at 6 the next morning. 11 years old, scanned from a Carbon 1 canvas sack, bulk transfer, undeliverable as addressed, no value, originating station on the west side of the valley. The sending carrier had signed it. The signature was a scrawl that had been photocopied and re-photographed until it was mostly noise, and under it there was a small, closed loop, a curl of ink hooked below the last letter. The kind of tick a person picks up from signing electronic screens all day and never notices. Bess printed it. She did not know yet that she had just printed the whole ending. At 9:30, her supervisor Cal Pruitt came down the mezzanine stairs with his glasses in his hand, which was how he came when it was bad. "Your Sittler report got pulled," he said. "Pulled by who?" "That is the thing. It got pulled twice. One is a records request out of a law office in the city. The other one has no requester attached at all." He put his glasses back on. "In 19 years, I have never seen a query with no requester attached." Bess walked out through the lobby at noon to get air. There was a mail transport truck backed into the dock, and a carrier in the standard blue jacket wheeling an empty tub cage up the ramp. A woman with sun-cured skin and gray coming into blonde hair pulled through the back of her cap, wire glasses forearms like a person who has carried a satchel up other people's steps for 22 winters. She held the door for Bess. Bess said thank you. The woman said, "You are welcome," and nothing else, and went back out into the cold. Bess would remember that door being held for the rest of her life. That night, the porch light of her duplex was off and the kitchen light was on, and Bess Aldana stood in her own doorway with her keys in her fist and looked at Bram Sittler sitting at her table with her shoebox open in front of him. It was a plain shoebox with a rubber band. Inside it were 19 letters, and every one of them was a letter she had solved. A boy's drawing of a helicopter that had taken her 4 months and a phone book to place. A wedding invitation that reached the bride 11 years late. She kept photocopies. She was not supposed to keep photocopies. It was the only rule she had ever broken in her working life. "Get out," she said. "You keep them," Bram said. "Get out of my house. You keep the ones you solved." He had not touched any of them with his fingers. He had a pen, and he was moving one page with the pen, and somehow that was more of a violation than hands would have been. 19 over 6 years, not one of them worth money, and you photocopied them and took them home, and put a rubber band around them like a person hides food. "You broke into my house. You could not have taken my letter," he said, and finally looked up, "which is unfortunate, because if you had taken it, I would know where it was." That was when Bess Aldana understood that she had not been cleared. She had been eliminated. It was not the same thing, and he was not going to pretend it was, and he did not apologize, and it occurred to her that this man had probably not apologized to anyone in 20 years. "Then we are done," she said. "Get out." He stood up. He was reaching for his coat when the front window went white with headlights, and Bram Sittler moved across that kitchen faster than any large man she had ever seen, and put his hand flat on the light switch, and the house went black. 2 doors closed out on the street. "Back bedroom," he said, in a voice with nothing in it at all. "Sit on the floor with your back against the wall between the closet and the corner. Do not stand in a doorway." "Who are they?" "Go." She went because there is a voice that people obey, and he had it. She sat on the floor of her own bedroom in the dark, with her heart going in her throat, and she heard the screen door and a voice she did not know, and Bram's voice saying 3 or 4 quiet words, the way a man reads a gas meter. Then nothing. Then a car leaving not fast. When she came back down the hall, he had turned the light on and was standing in her kitchen with his coat over his arm, wiping a smear of something dark off the outside edge of his hand onto the coat lining. "They will not come back tonight," he said. "Were they here for me?" "They were here for what you found. You are the same thing as what you found to them. That is not the same as being important." He put the coat on. "I will tell you the truth once, and then you can decide. I have people who can put you in a room in another state by tomorrow, and nobody will ever find you. I am not going to offer you that because if you disappear, the 270 letters stay in a federal building I cannot walk into twice, and I need them read." "You want me to read them?" "I want you to find the first one. And if I say no?" Bram Sittler looked at her for a long moment. "Then I go and stand somewhere else," he said. "And you die on a Thursday, and I will not know about it for a week." He should not have said it, and he did not care that he should not have said it, and that more than anything else that had happened was the moment Bess stopped being frightened of him and started being interested, which is a far more dangerous condition. She made him come to the vault at 7 the next morning, and she made him wear the visitor gloves. "You want to know how a letter dies," she said. "That is what you are asking me. So I am going to show you, and then you are going to stop looking at me like I am a suspect, because a suspect could not tell you this." She showed him. She laid the tub out on the long steel sorting table under the one hanging lamp, and she talked, and for 2 hours the most feared man on the west side of that valley followed a woman in a cardigan around a warehouse and did not interrupt her once. She showed him how a letter is a body. Face, back, spine, corner, throat. She showed him the endorsements a carrier writes on the front of a returned envelope, in pencil. Always in pencil, because pencil is what lives in a satchel. Attempted, not known, no such number. She showed him how a piece with no return address dies immediately, and a piece with a bad return address dies twice. "Every one of these is somebody standing in a kitchen, wondering why nobody wrote back," she said. "That is not sentiment. That is the physical fact of the object." Bram stood with his gloved hands at the edge of the table and said nothing for a while. 270, he said finally. "Do you know what I wrote about?" "No, and I will not read them without your permission, and I will not read them for entertainment. And if you ever suggest that I would, I will stop helping you." He turned his head. It was the first time she had seen him do anything with his face that he had not decided to do first. "Everyone else in my life would have read them by Wednesday," he said. "Then you have arranged your life badly." That was the moment. She did not know it was the moment. He looked at her hands on the table, at the cotton gloves, and the gray callus on the side of the middle finger where a pen sits, and he looked a second longer than a man looks at hands and then looked away, and neither of them said anything about it for 4 days. The records annex was in a sub-basement downtown, and it was cold and the microfilm reader had a hand crank because the motor had died in the 90s, and nobody had ever come to fix it. Bess had signed them in as a research request, with a control number she was not strictly entitled to use. She was aware of a lot of things she was doing that week, and she kept doing them. "Certified mail leaves a paper trail nobody thinks about," she said, threading the spool. "Every piece that needs a signature generates a green card. The card goes back to the sender. But the delivery record, the actual scan of the signature, that stays. 11 years of it. If your letters were going into a house, somebody was signing for them. My mother signed for them. Then we are about to look at your mother's handwriting 200 times." She started to crank. The cards came up on the glass, one after another in that gray underwater light, tilted, badly filmed, some upside down. The address was the same on all of them, coming up over and over like a pulse. And in the signature block, over and over, in a small square hand, M. Sittler. Bram stood behind the chair with one hand on the back of it. He watched maybe 30 cards go by. "Stop," he said. Bess stopped the crank. Her hand had a break in it. His voice had gone very quiet and very flat, which she had learned was the sound of him losing control of something. She burned the inside of her right hand on a stove door when she was 19. 2 fingers never closed all the way. Every capital letter she ever made had a gap in it. That is why I know my own mother's handwriting from across a room. Bess looked at the screen. There was no gap. The capital S closed like a coil. "Keep going," Bram said. She cranked. Card after card, year after year, the same square hand, the same small closed loop hooked underneath, the last letter. The little ink curl of a person who signs things for a living. Bess felt her own skin go cold before her mind caught up, because she had seen that loop already. At 6 in the morning, on a scanned manifest carbon. "Stop," she said. She went to the terminal in the corner and pulled the address history on the house, which took 4 minutes. And in those 4 minutes, Bram Sittler did not move at all. The house had a forwarding order filed against it. Below that, in the vital records overlay the address system pulls for exactly this purpose, was a date and a code. The code meant deceased. The date was 18 years old. Bess read it twice, and then she had to say it out loud to a man standing in a sub-basement in a coat. And there is no good way to do that. And she did it plainly, because plainly is the only mercy available. "Your mother died in the 4th year of your sentence," she said. 18 years ago in March. Nobody filed anything with the Postal Service. Nobody stopped the mail. The reader hummed. The film sat frozen on the glass, with a signature on it that was not his mother's. "How many?" Bram said. "How many what?" "How many of the letters were after?" Bess did the arithmetic on the back of the request slip because she needed something to do with her hands. 270 letters across 11 years. The date on the certificate. 184, she said. He put both hands on the back of the chair and leaned his weight onto them and looked at the screen. And Bess Aldana watched a man find out that he had spent 7 years of his life writing to a woman in the ground and that somebody had signed for every single page of it. "Read one to me," he said. "Not here." "Read one to me." "Not here," Bess said. "And not tonight. And not while you are standing like that." And Bram Sittler, who had not been told no by anybody in 11 years, took his hands off the chair and said, "All right." They went up the stairs and out into the valley air, and the inversion was down on the city that week. The gray lid the mountains put on Salt Lake in winter, and the streetlights had rings around them. There was a black car at the curb with a man leaning on it named Osip Danko, who had been Bram's second for 9 years, and who looked at Bess exactly the way a dog looks at furniture that has moved. She saw a great deal of Osip Danko after that, and never once heard him speak above a murmur. The rail yard came 4 days later. They went out there because the bulk transfer manifest had a station code on it, and the station's old sorting annex had sat by the yard until it was consolidated, and Bess wanted the route sign-in sheets, which are paper, which live in boxes, which get put in the last building anybody bothers to look in. She found them. 2 banker's boxes on a shelf above a mop sink, furred with 11 years of grain dust. She was on her knees with the lid off the second one when she heard the door at the far end of the annex, and she looked up and it was not Osip Danko. There were 2 of them, and they came down the aisle at a jog. What happened next took less than 9 seconds, and Bess only ever got it back in pieces. The sound of the boxes going over, a hand on the collar of her coat, the extraordinary fact of Bram Sittler crossing 40 feet of concrete without appearing to hurry, and then a shelving unit coming down and the noise a person makes when the air is driven out of them, and then quiet, and then Bram standing over her, saying her name once. "Bess." "I am fine." "Say it again." "I am fine." He crouched. He did not touch her. He held one hand out flat, about 6 inches from her face, palm down, steady as a shelf, and waited until she understood that he was showing her the hand was not shaking, and that she should look at it until her own breathing matched it. "You are not going back to that building alone," he said. "I work there." "You are not going back to that building alone. You cannot tell me where to work." "No," Bram agreed, and stood and put his coat over her shoulders, because she was on the floor of a freezing warehouse in January, and shock had started to arrive. And then he said in the flattest voice he owned, "You are a witness. That is the entire content of your value to me. Witnesses who die are inconvenient." Bess sat there with his coat around her on the concrete, with grain dust in her hair. "Say that again while looking at me," she said. He did not. 3 nights later, he took her up Emigration Canyon to a house of glass and dark stone, with the whole city laid out underneath it like spilled sugar, and she watched him do to another man what he had not been able to do to her. Lowell Fisk was 51, thick through the middle, in a cardigan with a fire going and a decanter he did not offer to anybody. When Bram walked into his front room without being announced, Fisk did not stand up. 11 years, Bram said. You have had a piece of paper with my handwriting on it. 9, said Fisk. The room got very quiet. Bess, standing by a window with a view of 400,000 lights, felt her own pulse in her ears. Say the rest of it, Bram said. You already know the rest of it, or you would not be in my house. Fisk turned the glass on the arm of the chair. I have a letter in a box in a bank. It has 20 names in it, and a place and an hour, and it is in your hand, and you wrote it 3 years before those 20 people stopped being anywhere. I did not need to use it. I needed you to know I could. That is what a leash is. Who sold it to you? That, Fisk said, is the only thing I own that you cannot take. Bram Sittler crossed the room. He did not raise a hand, and he did not raise his voice, and he leaned down and put his mouth beside the ear of a man in a cardigan and said something that took about 4 seconds, and Lowell Fisk's face came apart like wet paper. On the way down the canyon, Bess drove because Bram's hands were not right, and both of them knew it, and neither of them said it. 20 people, she said, inside of 1 week in my 2nd year. They read me the names through glass. 6 of them were mine. 4 of them were children. He was quiet for a mile. I wrote that letter the night before a job when I was 23, and I thought I would be dead by morning. I put everything in it. Names, the hour, where we would be. I put it in a mailbox on a corner because I wanted one person alive to know what I actually was before it was over. Then I did not die, and I went inside for 11 years, and 3 years later 20 people were gone, and I have known since I was 26 exactly whose hand wrote them down. You thought you did it. I did do it. No, Bess said. You wrote it, somebody else did it. Those are not the same object, and I would know because sorting them is what I do. The lights of the valley came up under the car, and he did not answer for a long time. Read one to me, he said. Tonight, you pick. So she read to him. In her kitchen in Rose Park at 1 in the morning, with the 270th letter in a plastic sleeve, because it was still federal property, and she was still technically a person with a career, Bess Aldana read a man his own words out loud. He would not sit in front of her. He stood 3 steps away, with his back to her, and his hands in his coat pockets, facing the dark window. And she read a letter written by a 24-year-old man to his mother about a bird that had got into the yard. It was not about anything. That was the terrible part. 270 letters, and almost none of them were about anything. A bird, a man in the next cell who sang badly, how the light came in at a certain time of year. And a question always at the end, always the same question in slightly different words. Are you all right? Tell me you are all right. She stopped after the 4th one because her own voice had gone. Keep going, he said without turning around. Bram, that is the first time you have used my name. Keep going, she said. It is your turn to say it. He turned around. He came and stood at the other side of the table with the whole width of it between them, and he looked at her the way she had seen him look at her hands in the vault, and he did not close the distance, and she understood he was not going to, and that the not going to was the point. I know you leave the building at 4:20 when you are on days, he said. I know you park in the 2nd row because the 1st row floods. I know the woman who owns your duplex is named Verna and cashes your check on the 5th. I know you turned down a supervisor posting in Ogden 3 weeks before I ever heard your name because you did not want to stop opening boxes yourself. He put one hand flat on the table. There has been a car outside this house every night for 6 nights. You have seen it. You have not called anybody about it. And when I say I need you to find one letter, I am no longer entirely certain that is what I need. That is the most frightening thing anybody has ever said to me, Bess said. Yes. I have not asked you to stop. No, Bram said. You have not. The 271st letter got found by a woman with a magnifier and a pencil habit at 4 in the morning on a Sunday alone. Bess had the route sign-in sheets spread across the steel sorting table under the hanging lamp. She had the scanned manifest carbon. She had 11 years of green card signature scans blown up until the ink was the size of rope. And she had 106 envelopes off her own shelves that had come back from that same West Side route with a carrier's pencil endorsement on the front. She did what nobody in that building had done in 11 years, which was to look at the writing instead of the words. The endorsements were pencil all block capitals, and block capitals are supposed to be anonymous. But the person who wrote them had a habit. Every time she wrote the word attempted, she started the second T before she finished the first, so the crossbar ran through both. Every date she wrote, she underlined, and when she signed anything, her pen dropped a small closed loop below the line, a little curl like a fishhook, because for 22 years she had signed a scanner screen 40 times a day, and the screen needs a stop stroke or it will not register. The loop was under M. Sittler on 11 years of green cards. The loop was under the illegible scrawl on the bulk transfer manifest. And the loop was under a name printed clean and legible on the route sign-in sheet for that station, 12 times a week for 22 years, and a column headed Carrier of Record. Kroll H. Bess sat down on the floor of the vault, between two shelving units, with the paper in her lap, and thought about a woman in a blue jacket, wheeling an empty tub cage up a dock ramp, holding a door for her, saying, "You are welcome." She called Bram at 4:10 in the morning, and he answered on the first ring, which told her something about his week. "It was never a break in your family," Bess said. "It was never anybody in your world at all. It was the carrier. The letter did not fail to arrive. It arrived. It was signed for at the door by the woman who walks that route, and so was every letter after it for 11 years. And she has been reading you since you were 23 years old." There was a silence on the line so long that she checked the screen to see if the call had dropped. "What is her name?" Bram said. "Hetty Kroll, 44. She has walked 32 boxes on that street since she was 22, and there is not one piece of paper in this state with her name on it that anybody has ever looked at twice." Bess put her hand over her eyes. "Bram, she has been in my building. She held a door for me." "Do not go anywhere. I am not finished. She sold one letter. 1 out of 271. She had 11 years of your interior life in a house somewhere, and she sold exactly 1 page of it, once to one man at the moment it was worth the most. That is not a person who got greedy. That is a person running a business, and she has been running it longer than either of us has had a job." They went to the station at 5 in the morning, which is when carriers case their routes, and which Bess chose deliberately because she wanted witnesses and fluorescent light and the ordinary hum of people doing a job. It did not help. Hetty Kroll was at her case with her back to the aisle, pulling a tray of flats and slotting them into the pigeonholes by feel, fast, the way somebody does a thing after 22 years. She did not turn around when they came up behind her, and Bess understood at once that she had watched them cross the whole floor in the reflection of the wire glass. "Mrs. Kroll," Bess said. "You are the recovery clerk," Hetty said, still slotting. "You filed the report on the 21st. "Yes." "That was careless of you." She slid 3 more flats home, and then set the tray down and turned around. She looked at Bram Sittler the way you look at weather. "You are a lot older." "You read my letters," Bram said. "I read all of them." She took her glasses off and cleaned them on the hem of her jacket and put them back on. 270 from you and about 11,000 others off that street in 22 years. You would not believe what people put in the mail. Nobody believes it until they have carried it." She tipped her head. "You always ended the same way. Are you all right? Tell me you are all right. You wrote that 184 times to a woman who died in March in a bed in a facility on Redwood Road, with nobody in the room, and I signed for every one of them. And I want to be clear with you because I do not think you are going to give me another chance to be clear. I did not do that out of cruelty. I did it because if I had stopped signing, the address would have gone dead. And if the address had gone dead, I would have lost the only thing I had ever found worth having." "Which was what?" said Bess. Hetty Kroll looked at her then. There was nothing behind it. That was the part Bess could not get out of her head afterward. Not hate, not fear, not even much interest. A woman looking at a slot to see which pigeonhole it went in. "Information nobody knows they gave you," she said. "You sold 1 letter, Bram said. "I sold 1 letter. I have sold 9 things in 22 years, out of everything that has gone through my hands, and I have never been asked a question by anybody ever, because I am the last person in the chain, and there is no such thing as the last person in the chain." She pulled her satchel strap over her shoulder. "You want to know why I picked yours? It was not the 20 names. Anybody could have sold 20 names. It was that you wrote it down at all. A boy of 23 who could not carry a thing by himself for one night. I knew from the first envelope you would be worth money someday, and I put you in a box, and I waited 19 years. Bram Sittler took a step, and Bess put her hand flat on his chest, and he stopped, which she thought about for a long time afterward. "Where is it?" he said. "In the last place either of you would look. Where is it?" Hetty Kroll smiled at him with no warmth at all, and reached into the satchel, and it was not for paper. Bess never remembered making the decision. She went sideways into the case, and 100 pounds of steel pigeonholes and 1,100 pieces of somebody's Tuesday came down across the aisle, and the shot went into the ceiling tile, and then there was a great deal of noise on that floor, carriers shouting, trays going over, and a woman in a postal uniform going out through the dock doors at a dead run with a satchel across her body. They found her 40 minutes later at the address. There had not been a house there in 11 years, only a foundation full of snow and cheatgrass and the black stub of a chimney, and at the front of the lot, still bolted to its post, a mailbox with the flag rusted down. Hetty Kroll was standing at the box with the lid open. "It is not in there," Bram said. "It has never been in there." She did not turn. "But I have opened this box every working day for 22 years, and I do not know how to be anywhere else at 6 in the morning. Then the second car came up the street, and it was Lowell Fisk's people, because Fisk had also been listening for 11 years. And the next 90 seconds happened in a vacant lot in the snow, with the mountains going pink behind the valley. Bess got most of it wrong in her statement later. What she got right was this: Bram Sittler put himself between her and the street. He did it before the doors opened and without a word. And he stayed there, and something hit him high on the left side and turned him a quarter step. And he did not go down and did not stop covering her. Osip Danko came around the front of the car. There was a sound like a door slamming 4 times. Hetty Kroll went down on one knee beside the mailbox post, with her hand pressed to her side, still holding the satchel. And she was still holding it when the county units came in from the north end, with their lights going. Bram was on his knees in the snow, with his hand inside his own coat, gray-faced, and he looked up at Bess and said, "It is in a bank." Fisk said a bank. "It could be any bank in this state." "It is not in a bank," Bess said. "It has not been in a bank since Thursday." He stared at her. "On Thursday, I sent a certified letter to Lowell Fisk's own office, on my own authority, requesting release of an item of correspondence held improperly with the recovery control number attached," she said, kneeling in front of him and putting both hands on the sides of his face, because his eyes were going wrong. "The law office he keeps on retainer did what law offices do. They mailed it back to a federal facility to make the problem go away." Her voice cracked, and she pushed through it. "It came into my building yesterday afternoon. Registered. Restricted delivery. Return receipt requested. It is in the mail stream, Bram. It is not taper in a rich man's safe anymore. It is federal property in a locked cage with a tracking number that 11,000 people can watch move. And there is not enough money in this valley to buy back one registered letter once it is inside. Nobody knows that better than the woman bleeding in the snow behind me." Bram Sittler started to laugh, which turned into something else halfway, and he put his forehead down against her shoulder in the snow of a vacant lot, and stayed there. They read it 8 days later, in a room with a federal seal on the door, his arms strapped across his chest, and a woman from the inspection service at the end of the table. The letter was 4 pages. The first 3 were the names and the place and the hour, and they were exactly as bad as he had carried them in his head for 22 years. The 4th page was 1 paragraph, and it said, "I am giving this to you and not to anybody else because you are the only person alive I am not lying to. Do not take this to the police. Do not give it to anyone, ever. I do not want to be saved. I want one person to know what I am before it happens." Bess read it aloud because he could not, and when she got to the end she looked up and said, "You did not inform on 20 people. You confessed to your mother and asked her to keep it. Those are different objects. They are still dead." "Yes," she said. "And the woman who made them dead walked past a mailbox 32 times a day for 22 years, and nobody in the world ever wrote her name down. You did not do that. She did." Hetty Kroll survived and gave 4 days of statements, and it turned out the 9 things she had sold in 22 years had cost a great deal more than 20 lives, and that no investigator in the state had ever had cause to type her name. Lowell Fisk's people took the whole weight of the vacant lot. Bram Sittler did 11 months for things that had nothing to do with a letter. And Bess was on the visitor list from the first week. and the mail she sent him arrived every single piece of it because she walked each one into the acceptance unit herself and got a receipt. The 270 letters were released to him on a Tuesday in October. He came to the vault to sign for them, and Bess made him do it properly at the counter, with the form, and she watched his hand, and there was no little loop under his name, and she thought about that for 1 second, and then put the thought away forever. They laid them out on the steel sorting table under the hanging lamp, all 270 of them, in rows the whole length of the table, and left one clean, empty rectangle in the middle, where the first one would have gone, because the first one was evidence now, and would be for years. Bram stood at one end of the table, with both hands planted on the steel, taking his weight on them, head down over all that paper. Bess stood at the other end, and held the lamp so it swung, and the light went along the rows. "What do I do with them?" he said. "Nothing. That is allowed." 270 letters to a woman in the ground. 186 of them got to her, Bess said. "The arithmetic is not the point. Somebody read every one of these. That is not what you wanted, and I am not going to tell you it is a kindness. But you were not talking to nobody. In 11 years you were never once talking to nobody, and I have spent 6 years in this room, and I can tell you that is more than almost anybody gets." He came around the table. He came all the way around it, past all that paper, and stopped in front of her, closer than he had ever stood, and she could see the gray of his eyes going through her. And neither of them moved for what felt like a very long time. "I do not know how to do this," he said. "You have written 271 letters," Bess said. "You know exactly how to do this. You have just never had anybody at the other end." Then Bram Sittler put his hand along the side of her face, the way a man puts down something he has carried too far, and kissed her under a hanging lamp in a warehouse full of everything the world had given up on. He writes to her now. He does not have to. She lives 11 minutes from his house, and he could say any of it out loud over a table, and mostly he does. But once a month, there is an envelope with no return address on it, addressed in a square, dry hand, to a numbered tub in a building west of the airport, and Bess Aldana signs for it herself. She keeps them in a shoebox with a rubber band. The first one only had one line in it, and she has never told him that she reads it before every shift. "Are you all right? Tell me you are all right. If this one held you all the way to the end, stay a while longer. There is another story waiting, and it starts with a woman who finds her own name on a hospital bracelet in a dead man's coat pocket.